Journalist Sidney J. Harris once said, "If you treat someone under your control like a dolt, he will react like a dolt. If you treat him like an animal, he will respond like an animal. Treat him as an object of contempt, and he will be filled with a self-contempt that must sooner or later erupt in rage, hate, and violence." This quote acts as a great description of what the United States prison system does to its inmates. It's no secret that inmates residing in prisons in the U.S. live in squalid conditions, with overcrowded cells, limited sanitary products, and inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-guard violence. Even though some may argue that these atrocious living conditions are justified as part of the inmate's punishment for their crime, this line of thinking is harmful for many reasons, including the belief that we are a product of our environment. Therefore, when we put inmates into these cramped and dirty cells like wild animals in the kennels, the resulting behavior of these inmates while they finish their prison sentence and when they are released from prison, this resulting behavior is a response to the conditions we subjected them to. The behavior of inmates can be likened that to circus animals. They're forced to work under brutal conditions with harsh punishment. They're forced to sleep in filthy cages, and the conditions they're in are poor for their health, with unhealthy food, limited time to roam freely, and long hours of performing manual labor. If these animals are fortunate enough to be released or rescued, they are unable to properly return to their natural habitats. These animals are unable to fend for themselves, and they may have very unpredictable behavior towards humans and other animals as a result of the conditions they used to live in. Similarly, when inmates are released from the harsh conditions of prison, they are not always equipped with the proper resources to successfully reintegrate into society. Many times, former inmates struggle with finding a job, a stable income for themselves, reconnecting with friends and family, and rejecting past bad influences such as drugs, and surrounding themselves with people who would put themselves into situations to be involved in criminal behavior. Due to the living situations that inmates are forced into in prisons and the lack of support they receive leading up to and upon their release, many former inmates will revert back to criminal behavior and be sent back to prison. In order for the U.S. to reduce its high rate of inmates being sent back to prison, it needs to make serious modifications to its prison system that provides more programs to inmates while in prison and upon release that focuses on the inmate engaging in more positive behavior versus being punished. The United States high reincarceration rate for inmates is a reflection of the poor conditions inmates are forced to live in while in prison, and the lack of services to aid inmates in bettering themselves while in prison and upon release, which increases the risk of inmates reverting back to criminal behavior. Lowering this reincarceration rate has been found to be the product of providing educational programs to inmates and encouraging visitations. In a 2017 USA Today article titled "Reentry to Society or Back to Prison," Eileen Rivers acknowledges that restrictions, corruption, and limited educational and drug rehab services help ensure that more than 75% of prisoners return to the system within 5 years of release in America. As a result of prisons in the United States treating inmates poorly and the prison system not having enough high-quality services readily available to inmates, the United States witnesses a large quantity of released individuals go back to a life of crime. There are two leading factors that result in the United States having a high reincarceration rate of released inmates. The first factor is the conditions inmates are forced to live in and the way they are treated in prison. And the second factor is the programs and services, or lack thereof, that are offered to inmates leading up to and upon the release from prison. By having inmates live for months in these crowded conditions with cells that house more inmates than they should and dirty facilities, These inmates are taught that they don't deserve better than they are currently receiving in prison. This can result in inmates adopting new behaviors that are a way of coping with this situation. And upon release, they can find it very hard to break these habits, which may include constantly putting on an aggressive persona, and it's not something that can just switch off upon their release. Beyond the physical situation, there's also mental side effects to being imprisoned. The interactions that inmates have with guards and the fellow inmates have an effect on how they behave upon release. In 2019, Laura Patterson wrote in her article, How Norway is Teaching America to Make Its Prisons More Humane, that Norway has learned that by using dynamic security, which encourages positive interactions between prisoners and staff, to build a more respectful and therefore safer environment inside the prison, it was able to lower the recidivism rate in its prison system. Furthermore, while there are services in place to help inmates, they aren't always the most beneficial and the best at finding the correct solutions to inmates' needs. In his 2018 article, Why Aren't We Spending More in Prison Education?, Stephen Stewart included the fact that the RAND Corporation found that when used with other effective programs such as drug rehabilitation and mental health counseling, education can help to reduce crime and recidivism even more effectively. Despite knowing the benefits of these programs, they're not exactly the main resource the government is giving its money to in terms of the prison system. A 2008 study by William D. Bells and Daniel P. Mers, titled Inmate Social Ties and the Transition to Society, Does Visitation Reduce the Recidivism?, found that among inmates who were visited, the odds of recidivism were 30.7% lower than the odds of those who were not visited. Furthermore, beyond looking at the point-blank fact of being visited versus not being visited, it was found that inmates that were visited more often directly correlated to their risk being lowered more and more with each visit. Bells and Mers' study strongly relates to one done in the Netherlands by J. Bosker, C. Whitman, and J. Hermans in 2013 under the title, Do Intervention Plans Meet Criteria for Effective Practice to Reduce Recidivism? How Probation Officers Forget About Social Capital and the Basic Needs. And this study done in the Netherlands defined two basic concepts: social capital, which relates to an individual's personal relationship and the obligations and expectations that go along with them, and human capital, which includes skills and knowledge such as education that is supportive for getting a job. This study linked together here because Bells and Mers' study explains that there is a positive correlation between placing an importance of social capital and reducing recidivism rates. However, the Netherlands studies find that when making intervention plans, a greater importance is placed on human capital and social capital. In reality, both of these factors play a huge role in reducing this rate, and so they need to be placed with an equal amount of importance when intervention plans are being made. Education has also been found to have very great benefits in lowering the risk of inmates recommitting crimes upon release. And a 2019 study, Beyond Recidivism, Positive Outcomes for Higher Education Programs in Prisons, that was conducted by Emily Pelletier and Douglas Evans, found that inmates took this positive outcome from education a step further and found personal benefits from it, such as these higher education programs found getting a job easier. It gave them self-confidence, and it helped them to reconnect better with their friends and family. However, education isn't the only program offered. There are programs offered to help inmates with reintegrating back into society upon their release. And in 2012, Nora Wyckoff, Donald M. Lindhorst, and Nicole Moani wrote in their study, Recidivism Among Participants of a Reentry Program for Prisoners Released Without Supervision, found that inmates participating in a 6-month reentry program that offered assistance with multiple different services and provided monetary compensation with 42.2% less likely to revert back to criminal behavior when compared to individuals who did not participate in the program. While this is a very large difference between the rates of those who chose to be in the program and those who did not, something that is important to note is the fact that not everyone is offered the opportunity to be a part of these programs, and this needs to change considering the nearly 50% decrease in risk reverting back to criminal behavior that those who did take part in the program experience. In order to reduce the recidivism rate in the United States, a large focus needs to be placed on the needs of inmates in terms of both their needs in prison and when they are released. By not fixing the problem of overcrowding in prison, but also reducing the occupancy amount in prisons altogether, a larger focus can be placed on individual inmates and addressing what is necessary for them to correct their previous behavior. Also, when we alter the way inmates are treated while in prison, we change the way they behave upon release. For example, if inmates are constantly fighting and being aggressive due to poor treatment from guards and each other, they will not be able to switch their behavior off upon release. However, if we treat them kindly and encourage them to make positive changes in prison, they will reflect the positive attitudes shown to them upon release. Furthermore, more emphasis needs to be placed on reentry programs and self-betterment programs, such as education and drug rehabilitation in prisons. All prisons need to provide programs to focus on providing services to aid inmates while they are in prisons, and these programs to include but not be limited to substance abuse, rehabilitation, and educational courses, which help to lessen the number of risk factors that can lead to inmates being sent back to prison after they have already been released. Inmates also need to have healthy relationships throughout the duration of their imprisonment from multiple sources. It's important that inmates have positive relationships with guards and fellow inmates to ensure they make the correct behavior modifications that result in them straying from criminal behavior while in prison, and then they continue that upon their release, and it lessens the risk of reverting back to criminal behavior while they are not in prison and not under the constant supervision of guards. Furthermore, having healthy relationships with individuals outside the prison help inmates to have a more successful entry process because they have the connections to the outside world while still in prison. The United States' high recidivism rate is a reflection of the poor conditions inmates are forced to live in while in prison and the lack of services that they are offered. Lowering this rate of being reincarcerated has been found to be the product of providing educational programs to inmates and encouraging visitations. And a larger importance needs to be placed on giving inmates their personal space and rather than putting them in crowded prisons, and providing rehabilitation services for substance abuse, as well as encouraging positive social circles for the inmates.